sponsored by the LWVNC Tax Review Policy Committee. Members of the committee include myself, acting as co-chair with Ruth Ann Groh. Ruth Ann is a member of the Orange, Durham, Chatham Local League, also known as ODC. I am also the unit coordinator for the Mid-Sandhills Member-at-Large Unit based out of Scotland County. Lucille Howard, who was a key contributor to the last study that was done in the late 80s, is a member of the Charlotte Mecklenburg League, and Elaine Ogle is a member of the Wake County League and will also serve as our Zoom technical expert this evening. So at this point, I will turn it over to Elaine for her to review some Zoom meeting basics with attendees. Please, thank you, great. Thank you, Elaine. As I stated earlier, tonight's session is the third in a series of 5 informative sessions focusing on specific aspects of state and local taxation, including learning about the criteria of fair and equitable system, assessing the question whether current state policy of lower corporate taxes furthers the goals and economic growth of the state for its residents, and taking a look at other state league tax policy positions and their effectiveness to further that state league's advocacy goals. Our ultimate goal is to work to a member agreement on a revised LWVNC state and local tax policy position, and that will be the subject of our final session. So let me outline tonight's format for everyone. First, I'm going to provide a context or background on why the committee thought it was important for league members and the public to hear experts from varied backgrounds to discuss the benefits and drawbacks of lowering North Carolina corporate tax rates. And also, this is not a debate tonight. This is a process guided by our panel moderator for panelists to share what each knows about this important state and local tax policy, and just think conversation. To kick off the discussion, each panelist will be given no more than 2 minutes for a brief introductory statement on their overall perspective of the topic. And that will be followed by questions posed by the moderator to panelists. And then at the end of the panel discussion, each panelist will be given no more than a minute to summarize what they would like the audience to take away from tonight's session. And then as time permits, we will take questions from the audience. So please put your question in the chat room. And also, if you want to direct it to a specific panelist, please name that panelist. And then I will monitor the chat room for our moderator. We plan to wrap up the session no later than 8 p.m. And Elaine will be the timekeeper for tonight's session as well. Before I introduce our moderator and panelist, the committee would like to provide some background on why we thought this was an important topic to explore. North Carolina's income tax provides a critical source of public dollars to invest in opportunities across the state. But starting in 2013, the NC legislature cut the corporate income tax rate from 7% to the current 2.5%. And by 2030, the corporate income tax rate in North Carolina is scheduled to be 0. This in turn has reduced the percentage contribution by corporate income taxes to the state's general fund from over 7% to approximately 5% today, leading our residents to ask the question as to whether corporations provide their fair funding for critical needs such as public education, roads and bridges, and public safety, arguably services that companies and their employees also benefit from. But at the same time, the North Carolina Department of Commerce reported in 2022 that North Carolina was named as the #1 best business climate in business facilities annual ranking, and #1 in CNBC's America's Top States for Business, with companies such as VinFast, Apple, Fujifilm, and Toyota locating or expanding in the state. So what is the real story? Do lower corporate tax rates negatively impact our state's ability to fund critical needs that also attract businesses to expand or relocate here? Or does the reduction in corporate tax rates, even to 0, result in a business environment where North Carolina can effectively compete against other states to create jobs and investments that offset the reduction in revenue from the corporate income taxes? In other words, how does the current state policy of lower corporate taxes fit with the state's fiscal policy to adequately fund state needs? And can we find a balance between the two? Next slide, please, Elaine. Our moderator tonight is Deborah Goldstein. Deborah is the Executive Director of the North Carolina Leadership Forum, a program of Duke University. The NCLP seeks to create constructive engagement between North Carolina government, business, and not-for-profit leaders across party lines, ideologies, and professional experiences. She was a member of the 2022 steering committee, designing the format and focus of a facilitated program addressing the topic of state revenue titled, "What is the best way to pay for state and local government in North Carolina?" And with Deborah's permission, the report from that 2022 program has now been posted to the LWVNC website. So please take a look at it. Panelist tonight is Jean McLaurin. Jean is chairman of the Economic Development Partnership of North Carolina. The EDPNC is focused on recruiting new businesses to the state and supporting the needs of existing businesses. It is a nonprofit public-private partnership operating under contract with the North Carolina Department of Commerce. Jean is also the president and CEO of Quality Oil Company and a former North Carolina State Senator and Mayor of Rockingham. Dr. Holley Ulbrich is a professor Emerita of economics at Clemson University. She holds a doctorate in economics from the University of Connecticut and a master of theological studies degree from Emerita University. Holley has written several books and publications and is an active member of the League of Women Voters of South Carolina at both the state and local levels. Alexandra Sirota is the executive director of the North Carolina Budget and Tax Center. She was our guest speaker at our first session on understanding current North Carolina tax policies, and we welcome her back. I will now turn it over to our moderator, Deborah Goldstein. Again, if you have any questions for the panelists, please post it to the chat room and identify who the question is directed to. We will try to get to as many of your questions as time permits. Thank you, Deborah.
Hi, everybody. It's good to be with you this evening. I always say that things like tax policy, while they may seem boring or tedious, are in fact the most important things we can be talking about. So I'm glad to see you all here. It was really a delight to gather the North Carolina Leadership Forum and form a cohort around the topic of state revenue. And I thought I would just say a quick word about who was in the group and what we did. The purpose of the program is to really encourage state and local leaders to engage with each other deliberatively around issues and do more work to try to understand where other perspectives are coming from, even if you disagree. So in 2023, we gathered a group of about 36 leaders, included North Carolina State Treasurer, the Secretary of Revenue, several state legislators from both parties. Alexandra was in the group, as well as several other nonprofit leaders and business leaders from the community. And the group really represented a very diverse cross-section of North Carolina in every way you can imagine, including from rural and urban parts of the state, all different parts of the state. And we had a really fascinating set of 4 meetings where we took a deep dive into state revenue policy. A couple of issues that came up that you've already heard and you'll hear more about tonight are the tensions between making the state competitive and making sure we have adequate revenue to fund what we need. There's also a lot of tension between progressive tax structures and flat or more what might be perceived as more even tax structures. A lot of discussion of differences between rural and urban needs and tax policy and the consequences of tax policy for rural and urban areas, as well as tensions around federal, state, and local policy. So just quickly, some of the issues we talked about ended up being around the progressivity or lack thereof in the tax structure here, the adequacy of revenue, particularly for transportation needs in the state, county reliance on property taxes, and the use of North Carolina debt to also fund state needs. So we dug deep into several different policy solutions around each of those topics and debated the benefits and downsides of many of them. And if you're interested in learning more about some of the subjects we touched on or who else was in the group, you can look at the report on the League of Women Voters website. With that, I'm going to turn it over to, I think, to Jean to introduce himself and make a brief topic statement, and we'll go around to all of our panelists.
Okay, thank you, Deborah. It's good to be with all of you this evening. Thanks to the League of Women Voters for this important conversation that we're going to have this evening. And again, I'm glad to be with you. Martha introduced me. I've been fortunate, I guess, chairing this Economic Development Partnership in North Carolina for the past 4 years. And prior to that, I served also on this board. So I've had a number of years as an elected and appointed official. I say now I'm a recovered politician, which is a good role to finally reach. But I've had over 40 years in business, so you know, it gives me a good perspective, I think, on the public sector and what is important to be able to provide services to our citizens, as well as, you know, as someone who spent over 40 years in the private sector, and to be able to meet a payroll and provide jobs and economic growth. So it's good to be with you tonight, and I look forward to the questions and the conversation, and I'll turn it back over to you, Deborah.
Professor Ulbrich, you want to open up?
Yeah, some of you probably have a portfolio or a financial advisor, and they suggest that you diversify, but not too much. But diversification reduces risk, and it provides a revenue stream for retirement. And well, this is the state's portfolio, taxes. This is where their revenue stream comes from, and they also need to diversify for some of the same reasons and some not. Typically, states settle on about 5: sales taxes, corporate and individual income taxes, property taxes, excise taxes, and fees and charges. But I just want to focus really on what the criteria are. You want, as you said earlier, you want adequate revenue to provide public services that are needed by businesses as well as by households. You want a fair distribution of the burden of taxes, and that means that different taxes contribute more or less to making it more equitable. You want to have taxes that give people incentives to work and produce and be responsible for themselves. That's called efficiency. And you want taxes that will grow as with inflation and population growth. Those are basic. So where does the corporate income tax fit into that? They consume public services, and so they need to contribute something toward the cost of those services, roads and infrastructure and education for the people who come to work for them, and just the general amenities of life. So adequacy is important, and I'm surprised that you went down lower than South Carolina. Usually we're more farther ahead on things like that, but you are actually ranked 10th by the Tax Foundation in state business tax climate. That's 10th from the top. And on corporate taxes, you're now ranked 5th. So they like this tax foundation likes it a whole lot. So it does affect adequacy. It's a tax that it tends to be paid by higher income people. It's the only really slightly progressive element in the system. It does provide for growth. So it has some good attributes that I would sort of not like to see lost.
Thank you. And Alexandra?
Hi, it's great to be with you all. Thank you to the League for hosting this. Thank you to my fellow panelists. I'm very excited to be in this conversation, and just want to say that it was an honor to be part of the NC Leadership Forum on this topic, and just really appreciate the opportunities to be in a space where we can talk through some of the differences and commonalities in our ideas about what North Carolina needs to thrive. And I know that's something that we all care deeply about, is making sure that our state and the people in our state have what they need. So our concern really comes down to the fact that the decision to eliminate the corporate income tax signals a choice that emphasizes big corporations over North Carolina's people, homegrown businesses, and future generations. When corporations no longer contribute to our state by paying the corporate income tax in North Carolina, the state will have $2 billion less in public money. Even though, as we've already heard mentioned, corporations benefit from countless public investments, from the education that prepares our workforce to the roads that get goods to market. Revenue from the corporate income tax supports the growth and opportunity that North Carolinians deserve. So while corporate income tax payments are a very small portion of the total costs for an individual businesses, they really add up to such a crucial contribution to our collective effort to fund public services. So to put that $2 billion number in context, that would allow the state to expand child care assistance to every eligible family in North Carolina. That $2 billion could fund a child tax credit that would slash child poverty by 25% in our state, and so on. So these public dollars really do advance the growth and opportunity in our state that we need to continue to drive forward to a better future. I think one of the big pieces that I would emphasize that hasn't been talked about as much is the corporate income tax is really paid by a very small number of businesses. Many of them, 72% of North Carolina's corporate income tax collections, come from highly profitable corporations that operate in multiple states. That number of profitability is over 25 million. And so what we know is that where the jobs get created is from the small businesses, the entrepreneurial startups that we need to support in our state through investments in small business assistance, through translation of research and development at public universities into marketable ideas, through investments in equitable workforce development. So I think fundamentally for our organization and for what we want to see in North Carolina, we want to see the ability of the state to continue long-term to invest in the well-being of our communities, and the corporate income tax and contributions from profitable corporations plays a critical role in that.
Thanks, Alexandra. I think you touched on this briefly, and maybe Jean, you can address sort of the counterpoint here. Corporate taxes provide only about 2% of North Carolina tax revenue, compared to maybe 20% from sales use tax, 30% from personal income tax. So how does the policy of low corporate tax benefit the residents of the state, given the sort of obvious lack of revenue from that resource?
Alexandra, did you want to answer that, or do you want me to?
I'm happy for you to, and then we can talk around it. Yeah.
Let me say this. There are a lot of factors, and let me back up a little bit, talk just a little bit about the work of the Economic Development Partnership in North Carolina. Martha introduced our organization, but we are a nonprofit. We were created 10 years ago with the objective to put some private sector practices into recruiting jobs to North Carolina, helping existing industry to grow and expand, and other services that we provide to the Department of Commerce. And Chris Chung is our CEO. One of the things we do, we're usually the first point of contact when somebody is looking at North Carolina as a potential site to do business. We have a sales and marketing team that are available. If the lead comes through Commerce first, they defer it to us. It goes to the governor's office or to someone in the legislature. It usually starts out with our team. So and we deal with a lot of site consultants who are representing companies.
Good.
I'm sorry. There's a lot of site consultants who are representing companies who are looking at North Carolina. So I have to say that, you wonder, okay, what are the questions that these companies are asking about doing business in North Carolina? What are the important issues that they want us to talk about and to help them understand about our state? I will tell you the corporate tax rate is not near the top. That is not usually one of the first few questions that is asked. They want to know, the most important issue is, do we have the workforce? Do we have a trained, qualified, educated workforce? Over 80% of our citizens or our students are in the public schools. So, you know, that's the training ground, our public schools, our community colleges, our universities, public and private, to be able to make sure that we have that workforce that can continue to be the place companies want to locate their businesses. So, you know, I would just say from the outset that things like availability of labor, energy cost, quality of life, transportation, those are things that are way ahead of companies asking about corporate tax rate. I think most companies, frankly, are okay. They understand that they do receive benefits from the public, from the state, and so again, it's that's not the top issue that companies are interested in hearing about when they are considering doing business in North Carolina.
So can you expand a little bit on the role tax incentives or credits or exemptions might play? Is that different than just the overall corporate rate, or is it sort of the same story?
Yes, and there are incentives for companies to do business in North Carolina. Most of those, though, are tied to specific criteria, such as number of jobs created, the investment that's made in our state. And you know, a lot of these companies, that's a part of their decision-making process, but they also understand that they have a responsibility, if they're going to come to North Carolina, to be able to the state does not just give away tax incentives unless there are performance-based objectives that these companies have to meet.
And Alexandra, go ahead, Alexandra. I was going to ask you another question, but you go ahead and then I'll follow up.
Oh, I was just gonna add to what Senator McLaurin was saying. I think you know, for me, one of the things that makes sense in what you're talking about in terms of the priorities that businesses place when they're looking at North Carolina is really on the biggest parts of their business costs, labor, transportation, energy, those things. When you look at what taxes represent in terms of a business's cost, the national average is less than a quarter of 1%, all put together. So it's just a small piece of the picture. And when we hyper focus on that and reduce that to such a level that we don't have the public money to make sure we can do great things with our universities, community colleges, and public schools, make sure that the quality of life, the natural resources in our communities are protected and people can enjoy parks and some of the beautiful spots across our state, that really does have an impact. So I just wanted to say that not only makes sense from the perspective of what you hear, but from the data too. It's just a small part of the cost. And then I think it's just very important that we don't talk about businesses as all one thing. Businesses come in all different types and organize in all different sorts of ways and some are subject to the corporate income tax and some are not. And a lot of the small homegrown businesses in our state aren't paying the corporate income tax right now because they don't have to. They're not legally organized that way. And those small businesses actually contribute more than 73% of the job growth that happened last year. So I think our strategies for economic development really do have to think about a comprehensive picture and all of the ways that businesses and communities can sort of support economic activity.
So that was my follow-up question, actually, if you could talk a little bit more about the smaller businesses. And so are they excluded because they don't earn a certain level of income or size of the business, or how does that work?
Comment on that.
Professor.
I suspect that you're like South Carolina, that partnerships and proprietorships, which are small businesses, pay personal income tax rather than corporate income tax. And so they're at a disadvantage with respect to their corporate competitors if you reduce the corporate income tax, but don't treat them equally. What we did in South Carolina, we have a 5% corporate income tax. And we reduced, we're now down a 6% personal rate, but we reduced it to 5% so it would match the corporate rate, and we wouldn't discriminate between businesses based on their form of organization. So that's something you might consider doing. To me, that the bigger issue, and I know you're probably talking about this in another session, is not the corporate income tax. Quality of services, yes, but also the huge disparities in property taxes across counties. As we say in South Carolina, nobody wants to be the only business supporting the tax system in Hampton County or Lee County or some of these little low country, coastal plain counties, and they're disadvantaged in not having the quality of the labor force. They're disadvantaged in being distant from markets, and they're disadvantaged by property taxes. So for them, the corporate income tax isn't going to matter one way or the other.
Yeah, thank you for talking about that. Could you sort of on the flip side of that, talk about how you might improve business tax policy for the benefit of rural communities or smaller communities? What kinds of things can help?
You can do targeted incentives in terms of business location that classify counties, but in terms of how much they need industry. But I really think that I was shocked at the disparity. I looked at however many, you have a lot of counties in North Carolina, and I looked at the property tax rates, and the disparities are enormous. I mean, just bigger than South Carolina. You guys are supposed to be better than we are. And I would think, and that's a huge disincentive for business location. I think that doing things that somehow encourage business to locate there, or looking for other ways of creating an income. There's we used to call in the old days the mailbox economy, the pension and Social Security people who don't demand a lot of services and pay some taxes. But that's not but the other one is making them attractive to people who work remotely. They all want to, I know they all want to be in Buncombe County, Mecklenburg County, and those areas because they're lively and exciting, but there are some workers who like a little solitude, and that might be a way of creating some attraction in some of those low country counties. I don't know.
Anybody
Debbie,
else?
I would just add to that. One of the things we've seen the benefits from the pandemic, and I hate to say we have benefits from the pandemic, but a lot of people, Holley, just to follow up on your point, have discovered that living in rural North Carolina has tremendous benefits. The cost of living is obviously less. They're able to work from home in many cases. And so we've seen some really positive growth in many of our rural communities from people across the street. My neighbors moved to Richmond County, which is a small county of about 45,000 people. They moved from Oregon. Now somebody down the street moved from New York. We've had a lot of folks that have seen the benefits of moving to our state because of the positive things that we have for them to do in addition. And it's a tourism destination. I think we're now the 6th most visited state in the country. So North Carolina has a lot of very positive benefits, and I think the key here is to find the right balance, and that's the challenge that I think our legislature and our elected officials face. Is let's find the right balance so that we can make sure that we've got an educated, qualified, capable workforce. And that's going to be crucial for us to be able to continue to be the top state in the country to do business.
Could you each also weigh in on revenue policy and long-term economic growth? Sort of what taxes you think harm long-term growth, what taxes are more helpful?
Who do you want to start?
Holly, you want to try that?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead, Professor?
Oh, okay. I think probably, and certainly not the corporate income tax. I think you need taxes that keep pace with increase in population and inflation, but are not too productive because there's a temptation to spend it and to not necessarily spend it wisely. So we need to have revenue that is adequate, but not too adequate, if there's such a thing as too adequate. And I think the sales tax is a good stable tax, and you've improved it a lot in North Carolina by the expansion into services so that it makes it a little bit more equitable. And I think that's a pretty, I think you have a pretty good balance except for the corporate income tax issue. You don't want to push any tax too hard because its flaws appear in terms of the incentives it gives people to do the right thing or to not do the wrong thing in terms of promoting economic growth and promoting quality of life. So I would say that again, going back to my portfolio, a balanced portfolio of taxes where you don't rely too heavily on any source because it could be at risk, and spread the burden around in ways that some are more equitable and others are more stable, and that kind of portfolio approach, I think, is probably the safest strategy of not letting the tax system get in the way of the health of the economy.
Yeah, go ahead, Alexandra.
I know we don't want to debate too much, but I think one thing that is really important in when I think about long-term growth is the role of tax policy in making possible a generational change and opportunity, generational mobility. And that is possible when we have adequate revenue. And I think we know that an income tax grows closer to how the economy grows over time, long term. And so, yeah, which is concerning when the approach right now in the General Assembly is a march to zero income tax. So I think we need to be clear that the corporate income tax moving to zero is part of a broader effort to move income taxes overall to zero. We're on that path as well in the personal income tax side, maybe not as fast. And I think the concern I have with the idea of focusing on the sales tax, which, again, I agree that there needs to be a balance across sources, is that the sales tax asks more from those with the least as a share of their income. So people who have less spend more of what they have, which makes total sense. You don't have very high income, but you've got to meet the basics. You've got to buy groceries, you got to buy diapers, you got to put gas in the car. All of the sales tax and excise tax you pay is a bigger share of your income. And that makes our tax code upside down. And so as we see these shifts away from the income tax, we need to make sure that our policymakers are really thinking about the people who are impacted, as well as the businesses. When people don't have the income to set aside to make sure their kids can go to college, make sure that they can fix the car to get to work, make sure that their youngest can be in a quality childcare environment, those things hurt our economic growth over time. And so I think, part of the work that we have to do is paint this comprehensive picture of like, what is the vision we have for North Carolina, and then work backwards on the tax policy side, because what I think has been the focus is lowering the income tax without thinking about what that's going to do across a broad range of investments we need to be making, and more comprehensive thinking about who's paying what right now. So I don't know if that's helpful.
Can I respond to that? Because I think there's a really important point that I didn't know about the income tax. I know we're doing that in South Carolina, but if you look at Tennessee, which has no state income tax, they have very high sales taxes, they have very high property taxes, and it's very foolish for a state that is as long and wide and short as Tennessee, has borders with like 8 states. There's a lot of cross-border shopping because their sales taxes are so high. So that's definitely a serious revenue problem for Tennessee. And Florida is another state that has no income tax. There's 10 states that don't have a personal income tax, and a lot of them have suffered as a result. It doesn't have to be high, but it's got a role to play.
Interesting. Can you give us a little insight into who sets state and local tax policy for businesses and who the influencers are that are leading to the current corporate tax policy? Maybe any of you, if you want to.
Yeah, there's a claim that has an element of truth in it that it's double taxation because the corporate profits become income to the owners, the shareholders of the corporation, and so they're taxed at the corporate level and then they're taxed at the individual level, so they get taxed twice. Well, that's not exactly true because the profits have to take into account that they're paying taxes for public services. So that's really more of a cost of production like labor and raw materials rather than something that their shareholders are entitled to. That's the argument I would make. But the argument you will hear is it's double taxation. And I would also point out that if you don't like double taxation, then why are we paying taxes on our income, not net of our Social Security taxes? Because it's exactly the same argument. I'm not suggesting that that's a good idea, but it's a parallel. You know, I pay Social Security taxes on it, and then now I collect it. But I used to pay Social Security taxes on it, and then I had to pay income taxes on top of all of it, and not without subtracting the Social Security taxes. So you could make that parallel argument, but don't let them turn it into not taxing Social Security because our federal debt is high enough.
Go ahead, Alexandra.
I think to the question about who is pushing these ideas, I think I would, from my experience, we know that a lot of the national rankings are a high motivator, and a lot of those national rankings bias towards a certain set of policy decisions around taxes. And you move up in the ranking if you do certain things that the rankings like to see. And so I would point to some of those rankings as driving some of the influence. And then there are tremendous national special interests at work in North Carolina pushing for these policies every legislative session. And they're driven by a broader agenda that isn't limited to North Carolina, but is about sort of a vision for how the economy works that I think is very out of sync with what most North Carolinians believe we need. Our state has been one that has identified education as a key pathway, has identified innovation and entrepreneurship as a key pathway, but the agenda of groups from outside is really to just shrink the size of government and reduce the income taxes for those at the very top, which again doesn't have the benefit of supporting the people in our state. And so when we've asked North Carolinians, do you agree with this? Overwhelmingly, they don't. Overwhelmingly, public support is for making sure that corporations pay, making sure that very wealthy North Carolinians pay. They want to make sure that our state can make these kind of critical investments. And so I think, one of the things that is disturbing about tax policy is the heavy influence of special interests and outside groups when they disrupt what people in the community want to see happen for their Main Street, want to see happen for their schools. That's a problem that we really have to tackle alongside making good economic choices. It's a good process to get there.
I'd just add, Alexandra, you're exactly right. And we all know that most of the state budget is spent on public education, and as it should be. That is what is most important for us to be able to have the kind of population that we want for our citizens. And there's a big disparity between the rural districts in North Carolina. North Carolina has the second largest rural population in the country after Texas. And you know, it's so important to be able to bring economic growth to these rural communities that we've got the type of education system that can provide those children that live in the rural communities an equal, sound, basic education. So I think your point about the national interest is a good one. We need to do what's best for the people of North Carolina. We're growing. We're having good success. Again, 2 years in a row, ranked as the top state in the country for business. But in order to educate our citizens to continue to be able to have good jobs for them for the future, we're going to have to invest in our people. And that's through public education. That's going to be crucial. And education in general, but public education is more than 80% of the citizens of the children in our workforce. And we all know the teacher vacancies in all of our communities, and what we've got to do to address teacher pay issues. You know, I don't know the statistics, but I know we have thousands of vacancies across our state for teachers, and I know money is not everything, but it has a lot to do with being able to recruit good people to go into education.
So I'll ask one more question, and then we'll turn it over to audience questions. So a casual reader of state revenue policy might say, well, you know, we thought it was going to be tough times during COVID, but it sounds like the state has a surplus. So why do I need to be worried about lowering the tax rate if the state has a surplus?
And I just want to mention, this is Elaine. We have about 5 minutes left.
Oh, okay. State budgets, and they have to balance their budget. There's only one state that does not require a balanced budget, and there's good reason for that. So, you know, you need a rainy day fund. When the economy is growing and generating revenue, there are backlogs of needs, like improving teacher pay and helping those rural schools and building your infrastructure. And then when times turn down, you can sort of postpone those activities. There is a cycle. And the business cycle, I know, has been proclaimed dead more times than I can imagine, but you know, it'll come back. The good times do not roll. The economy is cyclical. So the reason we got through COVID so well, it was because the federal government pumped money into the states, and we're still kind of living off the residue of that. So, you know, that's not going to continue. So I think, in fact, there's probably more pressure now on the federal budget, when they can actually ever get one, to reduce payments to states in order to put things into other pressing needs. So I think the states, you know, I don't think they need to be giving away surpluses, which is what people tend to do, that is sending money back to the taxpayer. I think they need to invest it in some of the neglected needs. I don't know about your bridges in North Carolina. Ours are all substandard and about to fall down, and they don't need a cargo ship to run into them to make that happen. So I think there's state needs that need to be met and that need to be brought to people's attention, and say, all right, well, we've got the money, let's do it, because we may not be able to do it in the future. If the good times roll for 5-6 years, then maybe you can reconsider that. But right now, I think we've got catching up to do.
I would just add to that. I mean, I think the argument around the surplus, absolutely attributable to the response that happened in that immediate experience of the COVID pandemic, and that those dollars are sort of starting to go away. We're seeing that happen in the childcare system right now. Early childhood education is losing the stabilization funds this year. We need the state to step up and step in and make sure that that system remains in every community so that people can get to work, young children can get that early education. So I think it's really important to be clear that what is happening with the surplus is both the benefit of an economic response that happened quickly, but it's also the result of years of not making investments. And so we have a backlog of unpaid bills right now. We have a backlog of things that have not been happening in communities. And so North Carolina, in addition to having what is typically called a surplus or more revenue than what we thought was going to come in, we also are sitting on a cash balance that's quite significant right now. And those dollars are just sitting there while we have needs in community. So I always say that it's really important when we talk about revenue collections to say, just because we have more than we thought we're going to have doesn't mean we have what we need. And so what we need in North Carolina is a better estimate of what do we need? What does it cost to make sure every child has a sound basic education? We have that number. We know what that costs. We could fund that right now in North Carolina. We could make sure that no child doesn't have access to a sound basic education. We could make sure that every child who's eligible for childcare 0 to 5 and getting ready for kindergarten has that experience. We have the money to do that. And so I think that the point about the surplus is making tax decisions year to year is one thing. The way that tax decisions have been made in North Carolina, where a tax decision this year has been made, or last year has been made for 2030, is fiscally irresponsible.
Yes.
We have no idea what the needs are going to be in 2030. And basically the legislature has locked in future lawmakers for future communities to an experience of a revenue contraction that we don't know what that will mean in terms of what's out there on the spending side. So I think it's really, that's another aspect of the way decisions have been made that's really important.
And that's all we have for this part of the session.
Great. Let's go ahead and open it up to questions, and then maybe we'll give the panelists the last word after we.
Okay. I have one question from the audience, Deborah, and the question is, what is the rationale justifying corporate citizens not contributing to state financial obligations? I think this is my 2 cents worth. I think we've touched on that a bit when Holley talked about double taxation as an argument that's used, and Alexandra, I think, talked about the high rankings by outside organizations as some push to it, as well as the special interest groups. But in that, I'm still, except for maybe the double taxation, I'm still not hearing a rationale. And again, I'm kind of adding to the question, so I apologize to the audience member. But personally, I feel we don't have a lot of transparency to why these decisions are made. And I think that's what contributes to the fact that we ask these type of questions. There must be some, hopefully, economic or theory that they're basing on, in terms of lowering corporate income tax rates.
I think I may have a partial answer to that, and that is, it is the expectation that these companies will come in and they will create jobs, and the people who get the jobs will pay the taxes. So that there's generating more revenue through economic growth. And there is some truth in that, but it doesn't offset the fact that they use public services, they use roads, they hire educated workers, they have regulatory protections that affect their businesses as much as anybody else. There's a lot of things that they get from the state, and they're basically not paying their bills if they're not paying any taxes. Those are inputs into their production that they make profits on.
We have no other questions, Deborah.
I think Yvonne Brannon has her hand up, but Yvonne, you want to go ahead?
Oh, sorry. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to two things. One, Alexandra, I wanted to just check that I heard that this figure right, that this year or we're going to be losing $2 billion from the corporate tax rate. Is that right? Or 2 million next year? I kind of get that mixed up.
No, it's actually, so once the corporate income tax is eliminated, that's a $2 billion loss to public money.
Okay, at that
How
time.
much? Yeah, out of how much full budget? Do you know?
The budget is about in the $20 billion figure.
So maybe
And
10%?
yeah, so I think the more startling figure is combining the corporate and the personal income tax. When all of the rate reductions happen in 2030, it's over $13 billion, which is basically a third of our state budget.
Wow.
More than that. So again, we're talking significant
Yes.
reductions over time. But
And
I hope that
other
answers.
thing I wanted to just make a quick comment is that Alexandra, I adore you. I really mean that sincerely. I mean professionally and ethically, and I appreciate the comments that you make about the will of the elected and the will of the state and its citizens and its voters to decide the priorities. Yes, we don't have to have children waiting on NC pre-K. We do not need to close childcare centers. We do not need to have hungry children at school. We know that all of these things are avoidable. And so I appreciate that you have the professional respectability and bravery to speak up and say those things.
Thank you.
Sorry, we are running out of time. So Deborah, I guess if we go back over to our panelists to give their closing comment, takeaway comment, as I call it.
That sounds great. Jean, do you want to lead us off?
Well, I'll end with a story that I heard former North Carolina governor and United States Senator Terry Sanford tell one day. He was talking about a talk that he gave to a group of business people when he was governor, and he was talking about all the things he wanted to do for education. And somebody raised their hand and said, "So, Governor, this sounds great, but how are you going to pay for this?" And he said, "Taxes." And everybody got up and applauded. They were just excited. This was wonderful. And so after his remarks were concluded, he looked at his aide who was with him, and he said, "Can you imagine? All these business people were excited because we're going to pay for all these improvements in education with taxes." And his aide said, "Governor, I hate to tell you this, but they thought you said Texas. All this money is going to come from you. They thought you said you were going to be able to get it from the state of Texas, so not from taxes." And so he was obviously, it was, a story that he liked to tell from time to time. But the point is, look, we all know we've got to have taxes to provide services for our citizens. And the most important thing that we do, and I have enjoyed being a part of this conversation tonight, is that we make sure our elected officials understand that. And in your local communities, you have a right to express that to your elected officials. Let them know what's important to you, what your priorities are, and that's the way we bring about positive economic growth for our state and for our communities too. So I'll end with that. And sorry for the story.
That's a good
I'm
story.
going to use it in the future. Professor Ulbrich, you want to go next?
Yeah, I didn't know. I'm sorry, I didn't know about the income tax. I knew about the corporate tax. And one thing I know is once you cut taxes, it's hard to bring them back up. And I think that's going to be a real challenge for you. So anything you can do to slow the process of tax erosion, which is what's going on, only it's not, erosion's a natural process. This is a more of a politically driven process, but yeah, you've got to sort of defend the tax system and make people don't make the connection between the services they need and want and the taxes they have to pay. They're like in two different worlds. And I think if we can somehow get them to say that, as Oliver Wendell Holmes famously said, this was not a joke, unfortunately, he said, taxes are the price we pay for a civilized society. And I had an argument with a couple of my more conservative economist colleagues over that. And one of them said, the price we pay is too high. And I said, or maybe the amount of civilization we get is too low. So let's keep defending taxes as our civic duty, our obligation, and what we pay for what we get. And, you know, we can't go on providing services without a revenue source.
Alexandra, you want to wrap us
Wow,
up?
it's hard to follow all those great remarks. So I don't know if I have a good story to tell. I will just say that it's been really wonderful to be in this conversation. I think, you know, one of the things that I feel deeply is that North Carolina is an amazing state that had so many resources and assets and the capacity for greatness. But we so often don't take advantage of it because we make decisions that undermine the people here in our state. And when we are making these decisions about taxes, I think we have this tremendous opportunity to also share a vision for North Carolina's economy that really centers people and the role of people in coming up with great business ideas, of people buying at their local store, of people going to work every day and working to make sure that they have what their family needs. But those things are really important for us all to come together and collectively support through our tax dollars. So I'm all for defending taxes. I love that line. And I'm also all for really trying to figure out the way that we move our state away from a very destructive path we're on that so hyper focuses on the very wealthy and out-of-state corporations. So I really look forward to the opportunity to work with all of you and to continue the conversation about how we envision the North Carolina's future with North Carolinians. Thank you.
Thank you. Martha, I think it's over to you to
Yes.
close it out. I
Thanks,
apologize for
Deborah.
running over a little bit.
No, that's okay. Thanks again, Deborah, so much, and our three panelists. I also very much enjoyed the discussion this evening. I do want to just quickly go over some items. Again, there will be a recording of tonight's session with slides posted to the LWVNC website. We've also posted in the same location additional resource documents, including basic terminology and associated definitions that we've been using throughout the series, as well as a timeline of the major North Carolina tax law changes. And as I said earlier, just recently posted the report from the 2022 forum that Deborah was a part of. Our next session will be held in the beginning of May. We believe it'll be May 9th, again via Zoom, and features a review of other state league tax policy positions and how they've used them in their advocacy efforts. Further details and registration will come. The fifth and final session will be working to LWVNC member agreement on a revised state and local tax policy position. It is currently scheduled for the evening of June 6th. Don't expect it to change, but that date, but we'll let you know. And again, I'll just say thank to everyone for attending and have a great night. And if you have any questions, please contact Ruth Ann or me. Our email addresses are also on the LWVNC website. Good evening, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.